Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes. And I always do this. Not Freed Indeed Live, Case for a Creator book study. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and tonight we are going to be discussing where science meets faith, and we're going to be doing part one. I am sorry that I have to keep breaking these up into multiple parts, but I want to make sure that I'm covering the material thoroughly for you. And I also only have so much time to do prep work, so I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys the best content that I possibly can. So please do subscribe and check out all the stuff we do at Freed Indeed. And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe, help out the channel. So here we go, where science meets faith. And last time we finished up our series on evolution, talking about fakes and turkeys, and basically talking about the fact that the missing link is still missing and why this is a problem for evolution. So today we want to move on and talk. We're going to begin building a case for the creator. So we've examined the case for naturalistic explanations and found that the best naturalistic explanations are wanting. Now we're going to start examining the case for a creator. And to begin with, we're going to be looking at where faith and science meet. And so we're going to be seeing the interview with Stephen C. Meyer. And excuse me, basically, what Stephen argues is that faith is, as a matter of fact, compatible with science, and in fact, recent scientific discoveries are actually favorable to the faith. So let's start on page 83 of our book, The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel. And on page 83, we see once again, to start this chapter, there's two quotes. The first is from physicist Steven Weinberg, who says, "I am all in favor of a dialogue between science and religion, but not a constructive dialogue. One of the great achievements of science has been, if not to make it impossible for an intelligent person to be religious, then at least to make it possible for them to not be religious. We should not retreat from this accomplishment." So that's Steven Weinberg says that. He sounds just like the snarky atheists we encounter every day on social media. In opposition to that quote, we have another quote, though. "Science and religion are friends, not foes. In the common quest for knowledge, some may find this surprising, for there's a feeling throughout our society that religious belief is outmoded or downright impossible in a scientific age. I do not agree. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if possible in this so-called scientific age, that if people, in this so-called scientific age knew a bit more about science than many of them actually do, they'd find it easier to share my view." That's from physicist and theologian John Polkinghorne. So in this video today, we're going to start to examine the idea that faith and science can actually be friends rather than foes. Just like John Polkinghorne, I believe that it is actually when we lack knowledge about science and lack knowledge about religion, that we seem to see contradictions between the two. The more we study science and religion, the more we discover that they are in harmony and that they are friends. Here's another quote, though. The first gulp from the glass of natural science will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. That is from Nobel Prize winning scientist Hertz something. Why, darn, I had his name saved, but I didn't put it on my slide. I have it on another slide though, I think. But anyway, now I look kind of silly, but that's okay. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist and physicist, and very influential scientific mind. And he says, the first gulp from the glass of natural science will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. So now, to begin our discussion doesn't actually begin with Stephen Meyer. Instead, it begins with a gentleman named Rex Sandage. And Rex Sandage was an extremely prestigious scientist. He was he was one of the greatest cosmologists in the world, and let's see, few scientists are as widely respected as this one. The protege of legendary astronomer Edwin Hubble, Sandage has been showered with prestigious honors from the American Astronomical Society, the Swiss Physical Society, the Royal Astronomical Society, and the Swedish Academy of Sciences. Receiving astronomy's equivalent of the Nobel Prize, the New York Times dubbed him the grand old man of cosmology. So in 1985, Rex Sandage attended a conference, and the conference was basically about whether or not science was favorable to religious faith. And Rex Sandage was going to be one of the speakers at this conference. Now, the way that they had set up this conference was they had the atheist or agnostic speakers sitting on the left and the Christian or theistic speakers sitting on the right, and they were going to debate the issue of whether or not science and religion are compatible. And everyone thought that Rex Sandage was going to be sitting on the left. And this was an assumption that was made in the media because Rex Sandage was so thoroughly just so prestigious in the scientific community. It was just sort of assumed. In fact, not only was he very prestigious in the scientific community, but it was widely known that he had left. He had been raised Jewish, and he had left Judaism. So it was widely thought that he would be on the side of the atheists. However, as he approached the stage at this 1985 conference on science and religion, there seemed to be little doubt where he would sit. The discussion would be about the origin of the universe, and the panel would be divided among those scientists who believed in God and those who didn't, with each viewpoint having its own side of the stage. And he shocked everyone by sitting among the Christians. In fact, he said in his address that, quote, the more deeply scientists see into the secret of the universe. Newsweek had said that the more deeply scientists peer into the secrets of the universe you would expect, the more God would fade away in their hearts and minds. But Sandage disagreed, stating that he had actually become a Christian at the age of 50 years old. He said, "The Big Bang," he told the rapt audience, "was a supernatural event that simply cannot be explained within the realm of physics as we know it. Science had taken us to the first event, but it cannot take us further to the first cause. The sudden emergence of matter, space, time, and energy points to the need for some kind of transcendence." He said, quote, "It was my science that drove me to the conclusion that the world is much more complicated than can be explained by science. It was only through the supernatural that I can understand the mystery of existence." So Rex Sandage proves Werner Heisenberg, that was his name, Heisenberg, that was the name that I couldn't think of, Werner Heisenberg. The first gulp of the glass of natural science will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. He proved that because it was through the study of science that Rex Sandage came to believe in God, and not just God, but the God of Christianity, leaving his native Judaism behind for the true faith of Christianity. And this conference happened in 1985, the same year the Chicago Bears won the Super Bowl. And in addition to my Chicago Bears winning the Super Bowl, Christians decidedly won the debate about whether or not science pointed to God. Now, here was not only Sandage, but also prominent Harvard astrophysicist Owen Gingerich, concluding that the Big Bang seemed to fit best into a theistic worldview. Later came a session on the origin of life featuring Dean Kenyon, a biophysicist from San Francisco State University, who had co-authored an influential book asserting the emergence of life might have been biochemically predestined because of an inherent attraction between amino acids. This seemed to be the most promising explanation for the conundrum of how the first living cell could somehow self-assemble from non-living matter. To Meyer's surprise, Kenyon stepped onto the podium and actually repudiated the conclusions of his own book, declaring that he had come to the point where he was critical of all naturalistic theories of origins. Due to the immense molecular complexity of the cell and information-bearing properties of DNA, Kenyon now believed that the best evidence pointed towards a designer. Instead of science and religion being at odds, Stephen Meyer heard specialists at the highest levels of achievement who said they were theists not in spite of scientific evidence, but because of it. As Sandage himself would say, many scientists are now being driven to faith by their very work. So, in steps, Stephen C. Meyer. Stephen C. Meyer is the author of Darwin's Doubt and Signature of the Cell. He is an advocate for intelligent design theory, and he is both a scientist and also a Christian. Already having earned degrees in physics and geology, Meyer went on to receive his master's degree in history and philosophy of science at the prestigious Cambridge University in England, where he focused on the history of molecular biology, the history of physics, and evolutionary theory. He then obtained his doctorate from Cambridge, where his dissertation analyzed the scientific and methodological issues in origin of life biology, a field he first got excited about when he heard Dr. Kenyon speak at the Dallas conference. In the past 15 years, Meyer has become one of the most knowledgeable and compelling voices in the burgeoning intelligent design movement. He has contributed to numerous books, including Darwinism, Design and Public Education, Mere Creation, Science and Intelligent Design, Signs of Intelligence, Understanding Intelligent Design, and you can see there's a whole huge list here. I'm not going to read all of them. So the point is, he's very intelligent. Now, Stephen Meyer and Lee Strobel begin their interview by discussing the issue of science and knowledge. And you're going to hear me discuss a unique argument regarding this on this coming Saturday on Freed Indeed Live. I'm going to be discussing the issue of whether or not we can obtain knowledge outside of science, and the fact that, as a matter of fact, not only can we, but I think that there's actually at least one reason why it's irrational to suppose otherwise, because there is, apart from religion, apart from discussions about God and angels and demons, there are certain factors, certain facts that are paranormal in nature, that are indisputably, you cannot examine the evidence and come away disbelieving that these things exist. And because of that, I believe it's actually irrational to suppose that science is our only method of obtaining knowledge. But that it's actually a self-refuting position. So we're going to talk about this. J.P. Moreland, who's a philosopher, says science is the only source of truth in a technological society. And this is an assessment that I hear quite often. I hear quite often people say that they believe that science and scientific knowledge is somehow more certain than knowledge gained through other disciplines like philosophy or theology. But is this the case? Well, it's actually an irrational position because, first of all, it's self-refuting. And it's self-refuting because when you say that science is the only arbiter of truth, the only begetter of truth, that is a statement that the scientific method cannot verify. It is a statement that cannot be assessed by science, and therefore science itself refutes this claim that science is the only begetter of truth. And so if you've seen my video on boundaries of belief, you know that I make a similar argument about the doctrine of Martin Luther called sola scriptura. In that video, I talk about Martin Luther's statement that you are not required to believe anything save that which is directly taught in the sacred scriptures. So I examined that quote from Martin Luther, and I said that you'll notice that that statement is not found in scripture. It is not biblical to say that I am bound only to believe the things that are taught in the Bible. Therefore, it is a self-refuting position. Another self-refuting statement is Stephen Hawking's statement that, quote, philosophy is dead, end quote. As many actual philosophers have pointed out, Stephen Hawking is refuting himself when he makes this frankly idiotic statement, because to say that philosophy is dead is to make a philosophical statement, thus refuting your own claim that philosophy is dead. Well, it's no less irrational to say that science is the only or the most definite form of obtaining truth, because to say this is to step outside of the realm of science. You're doing philosophy to say that science is better than philosophy, but you can't prove that scientifically. So you're making a philosophical claim while saying that philosophy doesn't matter. To go deeper, though, we shouldn't assume that scientific knowledge is necessarily more valuable. Like I said, on Friday or on Saturday, I'm going to be doing a show in which I discuss the the fact that science cannot prove the existence of the paranormal, and yet the existence of the paranormal is something that is not only widely attested, but is overwhelmingly um, proven through lots of different kinds of evidence, but nevertheless could never be proven scientifically. Another thing that could never be proven scientifically is free will. And yet, when I chose to turn on the lights in this very room earlier, I demonstrated free will. I chose to make this video instead of sitting in bed and coughing. I made these choices exercising my free will. I don't have to do this. Nothing is forcing me to do this. I choose to do this by my own free will. And but free will is not something that you can prove scientifically, and in fact, there are many biological determinists who, because you can't prove free will scientifically, are claiming that there is no such thing as free will. And I actually have a book called What About Free Will? And in that book, this Baptist pastor who himself believes in theological determinism, he does not believe in the doctrine of free will. He believes that human beings are have a bound will, similar to what Martin Luther believed. And he actually examines the arguments of a lot of these biological determinists and examines them quite favorably. But it's interesting because you see that these atheists and these more Calvinistic sources actually agree that we don't have free will. And yet, free will is something that is time and again taught in scripture. Free will is something that we experience in our day-to-day lives. Free will is something that is demonstrable philosophically. It's something that's demonstrable in moral philosophy. It's something that's demonstrable in many different aspects of life. And yet it could never be proved scientifically. I like to sometimes call the paranormal side of that the argument from ghosts, because ghosts cannot be proven scientifically or disproven scientifically, but yet there is obvious, overwhelming evidence such that anyone who honestly examines the evidence for the existence of the paranormal and comes away denying the existence of the paranormal would have to be irrational. Albert Einstein himself even stated this. Now, he did try to come up with a sort of naturalistic explanation for the paranormal, but nevertheless, he himself said that denying these things is simply an act of irrationality. The real question is whether or not science points beyond itself. Stephen Meyer says, there is no question that science does teach us many important things about the natural world. The real question is, do these things point us to anything beyond themselves? I think the answer is yes. Science teaches us many true things, and some of those true things point towards God. So this sounds a lot like what Werner Heisenberg says in our quote above, namely that science actually points us to God. Science doesn't point us away from God. Science doesn't make us atheists. Rather, science, when rightly understood and deeply understood, actually points us to God. Again, Werner Heisenberg says the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Stephen Meyer compares the idea. Some people say that the relationship between science and faith is fundamentally at odds. Some people say that science and faith represent two entirely different disciplines and can never interact with one another. But Stephen Meyer says, I, however, personally take a third approach, which is that scientific evidence supports theistic belief. In fact, across a wide range of the sciences, evidence that has come to light in the last 50 years, which, when taken together, provides a robust case for theism. Robust case for theism. Only theism can provide an intellectually satisfying causal explanation for all of the evidence. Lee Strobel asks for examples, and Stephen Meyer says, for instance, if it is true that there's a beginning of the universe, as modern cosmologists now agree, then it implies a cause that transcends the universe. If the laws of physics are fine-tuned to permit life as contemporary physicists are discovering, then perhaps there's a designer who fine-tuned them. If there's information in the cell, as molecular biology shows, this suggests intelligent design. To get life going in the first place would have required biological information. Implications point beyond the material realm to a prior intelligent cause. And those are just 3 examples. That's just the beginning. So we see that naturalistic theories can't account for these facts. That's what we were examining in that 4-part series that we just concluded. But now we're asking if theistic explanations can account for the facts as science presents them. But this brings us to a question, and that question is what's called noma, or non-overlapping magisteria, which Lee Strobel presents in this book. He basically says that he challenges Stephen Meyer with this principle of noma. Now, noma is partially true. We should think of science and faith as occupying kind of a Venn diagram. And there are some things that science examines that really have no effect on religion, and religion has no real effect on those things. For example, if you combine 2 chemicals, you get certain results. That's a factual analysis of how things happen in the universe that God has made. As Galileo Galilei said, science tells you how the heavens go, the church tells you how to get to heaven. There is truth in that assessment. However, there are some things that just don't work with noma. For example, the issue of origins. So when we study the origin of life, this has profound implications. It has profound moral implications. Morality is something that religion speaks to. It has profound implications for what we believe about God. If we believe that God created the earth in a certain way, and then someone claims to be making discoveries that would suggest something else, then that changes our perspective. Additionally, there's places where the church and sacred scripture makes specific claims about how God created the world. These are specific historical claims, and when scientists claim to be speaking to these issues, it cannot be ignored that um that this doesn't fit well within Noma. Um, Stephen Meyer says trying to preserve Noma ends up forcing you to deny either aspects of science or the faith. The creator of Noma, a man named Gould, actually did just that with the issue of the resurrection. In his book Rocks of Ages, Gould reduces the appearance of the resurrected Jesus to doubting Thomas to being merely a moral tale. This was necessary for Gould to do under the rules of Noma, because all of Jesus's post-resurrection appearances come from a religious document, the Bible, and Noma says that religion must confine itself to matters of morality and values, but the Bible clearly portrays Jesus's resurrection appearances as being actual historical events. Christianity hinges on the conviction that these things really occurred. If this was just a moral tale, then why did Thomas willingly suffer martyrdom based on his claim that the risen Christ had in fact come to him and Jesus Christ was in fact alive? It makes no sense. Noma may try to exclude this possibility by restricting religion to mere matters of morality, but the writers of the Bible did not see fit to limit their claims about God to the non-factual domain that Noma has allocated to religion. There might be some religions that can fit comfortably with Noma, but biblical Christianity, because it is built not just on faith but on facts, simply cannot. Law professor Philip Johnson, who has been strongly critical of the Noma concept, agrees with Stephen Meyer, saying, quote, Stephen Jay Gould condescendingly offers to allow religious people to express their subjective opinions about morals, provided they don't interfere with the authority of scientists to determine facts. But one of those facts would have to be that God is just a comforting myth. End quote. So, and this, by the way, this cuts both ways, because this is one of Caleb's, from Caleb's corner, this is one of his big critiques of a lot of creationist materials, that oftentimes they downplay scientific evidence because of their commitment to Christianity, and they're not really understanding the scientific evidence, or them not really understanding Christianity. They downplay some of the things that is in science. So this happens in both directions, but it's always because people are trying to preserve this Noma concept. I say throw out Noma and replace it with something more like a Venn diagram, where there's aspects of religion that don't speak to science, there's aspects of science that don't really speak to religion, but there's aspects of both that speak to one another. So this takes us to science and theism, where Stephen Meyer says, I believe that the testimony of science supports theism. While there will always be points of tension and unresolved conflict, the major developments in science in the past 5 decades have been running in a strongly theistic direction. And the first example he gives is the Big Bang. Myers says, I would start with the new cosmology, the Big Bang theory, and its accompanying theoretical underpinnings in general relativity. These two theories now point to a definite beginning of the universe. The fact that most scientists now believe that energy, matter, space, and time had a beginning is profoundly anti-materialistic. You can invoke neither time nor space, nor matter nor energy, nor the laws of nature to explain the origin of the universe. General relativity points to the need for a cause that transcends those domains, and theism affirms the existence of just such an entity. In short, he he added, naturalism is on hard times in cosmology. The deeper you get into it, the harder it is to get rid of the God hypothesis. Taken together, the Big Bang and general relativity provide a scientific description of what Christians call creation ex nihilo, or creation out of nothing. As Nobel Prize winner Arno Penzias said about the Big Bang, quote, the best data we have is exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. So, the universe is caused, and a cause requires, or a caused reality requires a cause. Something has to create in order for there to be creation. Something has to beget in order for there to be begetting. Something has to transcend the reality of time, space, and matter in order for time, space, and matter to come into existence, which is precisely what we find to have happened. The second argument is the fine-tuning of the universe. The second category of evidence would be for anthropic fine-tuning. This means the fundamental laws and parameters of physics have the precise numerical values that could have been otherwise, and there is no fundamental reason why these values have to be the way they are, and yet all of these laws and constants conspire in a mathematically incredible way to make life in the universe possible. An example is that the Earth is the exact distance from the sun that it needs to be in order for human beings to live on the Earth. In fact, our solar system itself is positioned exactly in space, in the galaxy, in the Milky Way galaxy, where it needs to be in order for Earth to be a life sustaining planet. Because in other types of galaxies that aren't spiral galaxies, and in other parts of spiral galaxies that aren't like the part in which Earth resides in, you cannot get a life sustaining atmosphere, and you cannot get a life sustaining planet. This is actually the reason why the rare earth hypothesis has been something that is being discussed in science right now. The reason for the rare earth hypothesis is because, frankly, there's just too many factors that have to be exactly as they are, and it doesn't seem like there's anywhere else in the universe where all of these factors align. Um, as Sir Fred Hoyle commented, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Well, here's the thing, maybe it looks fine tuned because it is fine tuned. That's what science is showing us. Not religion, science is saying that the universe really looks fine tuned to support life, which sounds an awful lot like in the book of Genesis when God creates the universe, creates the perfect place for man to dwell, and then places him there. That sounds just like what I would conclude from the book of Genesis. On pages 94 and 95, the third example of science pointing toward God is the origin of life and the origin of the information necessary to bring life into existence. He continued, life at its root requires information which is stored in DNA and protein molecules. Richard Dawkins of Oxford University said that the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. If you reflect on that, you realize that computers run on software programs that are produced by intelligent engineers. Every experience we have about information, whether it is a computer code, hieroglyphic inscription, a book, or cave painting, points towards an intelligence. The same is true about information inside every living cell. The programming, if you will, that goes into every single living cell, the immense complexity of the cells, and not just complexity, but the information stored in them. If you took every copy of Encyclopedia Britannica and multiplied it by, I can't remember what the exact number is, but it's like something ridiculous. It's like if you multiplied every copy of Encyclopedia Britannica by 100, you would almost have the information, the biological genetic information contained in one single cell. That's a level of grandeur and programming that is simply not possible. It's simply not possible apart from a designer. In fact, Charles Darwin himself said that if cells turn out to be more complex than the science of his day believed that they were, then his theory would not work. So Darwin himself knew that his theory needed cells to be extremely simple. In fact, the word cell comes from the earliest microscopes wherein people would, the first person to examine the cell under a microscope thought that it was a very simple, thought that single-celled organisms were very simple, and named it after cells in a monastery where monks live, which is a hollowed out space for the monk to live in, because he believed from what he could see that cells were essentially a simple, mostly hollow space. We now know that's not true. There's a whole lot going on in the cell that those early telescopes couldn't see. And Charles Darwin himself said that if cells turned out to be complex, then that would torpedo his naturalistic theories. Now, sometimes people accuse Christians of believing in the quote unquote God of the gaps. So is what we've been talking about just the God of the gaps? Well, or an argument from ignorance or whatever. Well, Stephen Meyer actually addresses that by saying this is not an argument from ignorance. We're not inferring design because naturalistic evolutionary theories fail to explain information. We infer design because those theories fail and we know another causal entity that is capable of producing information, namely intelligence. I find this to be a very strong argument indeed. End quote. So next week, we're going to look at more arguments from Stephen C. Meyer. I'm going to do a part 2. But for now, I want to stop there because remember when we actually examined the theory of evolution, the theory of macroevolution, and we saw that time and time again, especially when it comes to the fossil record, evolution was actually the theory of the gaps. There's all these missing links, and they say, well, someday we'll find them. And then the few examples that they had where they thought that they had found missing links turned out not to be missing links. They turned out to be either outright hoaxes or just mistaken identity, such as the Archaeopteryx, which turns out isn't a missing link at all. It's just a bird. And so evolution is actually the theory of the gaps. Creationism is not a theory of the gaps. Creationism is a theory of the facts. So we're going to stop there. Next week, we're going to go through more examples with Stephen C. Meyer. And so subscribe so that you don't miss part 2. God bless and have a great day.